welcome to That Was the Week That Was, week 28 of 2023. Vince McLeod of the Alternative Centre is back with me once again to highlight some of the most interesting happenings of last week. Hi Vince, how are things in Nelson today?
Hey Bob, things are doing well, things are going well, things are unseasonably warm. It's been t-shirt and just about shorts weather the last couple of days, which is really unusual for this time of year. So I think we're going to have the warmest year on record again this year.
Wow, so interesting. Okay, well, let's just jump straight into it. President Biden last week signed an executive order that allows the Pentagon to call up 3,000 reserve troops to support Operation Atlantic Resolve, the U.S. mission in Europe that aims to deter Russian aggression and reassure NATO allies. Some critics have accused Biden of provoking Russia and risking a wider conflict, while others have praised him for standing up to Putin and showing solidarity with Ukraine. What are the possible consequences of sending more U.S. troops to Europe?
The possible consequences that we most should be concerned about are the possibility of escalation. Biden sends 3,000 troops. That's another couple of regiments. That's half a brigade's worth of troops to the border. Then we can expect that Russia will compensate by moving more troops and war material into the theatre as well. And so it'll be yet another escalation. The possible consequences that we should be worried about is someone throwing a nuclear bomb. That doesn't appear to be like the sort of thing that'll happen anytime soon, or at least not very soon. But the more troops and the more war material gets thrown into that theatre, the more likely it becomes, because the Russian advance seems to be going nowhere. And if they start to get pushed out of territory that they think is theirs, such as Crimea, then they could be really upset and want to lay down a marker.
So do you think Biden's decision is a wise move or a dangerous mistake?
At the moment, I think it's impossible to say. I think we're going to have to look back on, from a historical point of view, in about 5 or 10 years' time to say if it was a mistake. If it leads to a nuclear war that wipes out Western civilization, then I think we can definitely say it was a mistake. But it could lead to peace in Europe. It could lead to the Russian Federation being broken up into 4 or 5 sub-states, and that would make it impossible for them to do things in the future, such as attack Ukraine or any other neighbor. So I think anybody who says that they know that Biden's move is a good one or a bad one, anyone who says they know at this early stage is a bluffer, and realistically we're just going to have to wait and see what history decides.
On Wednesday, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand voted to keep the official cash rate at a restrictive level of 5.5%. It seems that inflation is slowing here, even though globally it's still very high. This is really good news, isn't it? Or is it too soon to relax?
It's good news for a lot of people. It's the high inflation is good news for people who have got loans, such as a student loan or such as a mortgage. So as usual with the economy, good news for one group of people is bad news for another group of people and vice versa. I think, though, that as far as inflation is concerned, it has been said that inflation is basically the same thing as entropy as far as an economy is concerned, which is that it's an economy falling into decay and disorder. So the lower inflation is better. But I think that high inflation is probably necessary for a while yet to deal with all the money that got printed.
According to the latest data, unemployment is at near record lows and inflation is well above the target range of 1 to 3%. How do you explain this, and what are the implications for the economy and the monetary policy?
I'd explain this as a result of printing the money. If you print money, then you end up with both of those things. You end up with companies can easily employ people for cheap because they've got a lot of cheap money. They can borrow cheap money, so unemployment becomes low. But at the same time, the inflation can also become really high because the economy is running so hot. So I think the money printing explains why both of those things happen at the same time, even though it might sound contradictory. As far as implications for the wider economy is concerned, I think we're going to have to wait and see what interest rates do. If interest rates stay high, then I think we can expect that the unemployment will start to rise, because companies will start running out of easy money that they can use to employ people. So that's one potential implication. The other one is that if interest rates stay high, then inflation could get pushed back down to that 1 to 3% band, which would be ideal. Ideally, we'd see inflation go down rather than unemployment go up. But as to one of those things has to happen, as to which one does happen, is going to depend on how well the economy gets managed over the next 12 or 24 months.
The latest Talbot Mills corporate poll has showed that Labour has sunk to 31%, while National is on 36%, with ACT on 12%. But nonetheless, supported by only 48% of the population. Some people say that a National ACT coalition would be a nightmare scenario for New Zealand, as they would only represent the interests of the wealthy and powerful and ignore the needs and voices of 52% of Kiwis. How do you respond to this criticism?
As an alternative centrist, I'd say that if you look to the past, if you look at previous national governments, the fifth national government of John Key, the fourth national government of Jim Bolger, and then Jenny Shipley, they have been extremely negligent towards the needs of the lower 52 or even the lower 90% of the New Zealand population. So I'd expect Chris Luxon to be another example of the same, which means that as far as the bottom 90% is concerned of the New Zealand population, it's understandable for them to have a fair degree of trepidation about the possibility of National Party return. I know that the John Key's national government gutted the mental health system, gutted funding for the mental health system, which was extremely difficult for anyone going through it at the time. And I would expect that anybody who remembers those times will be fearful that they might return.
What would you say to those who do fear that such a government will bring unfair and undemocratic policies?
It's time for the alternative centre really to rise and to stop the political system from just swinging back from the left to the right. People expect that the left and the right somehow work in unison with each other, but in reality, the left is just stupid and the right is just cruel. And so as we swing from one extreme to the other, society just gets worse. So I would say that the solution is to have an alternative centre that rises up, displaces both the establishment left and the establishment right, and starts introducing policy based on reason and logic rather than either ideology, such as the establishment left, or just crude feelings like the establishment right.
Well, now it's time for us to do drugs again. This week, an article in the British Journal of Psychiatry showed that ketamine has been shown to have fast-acting and long-lasting antidepressant effects in people with treatment-resistant depression. However, it also has some serious side effects such as dissociation, nausea, drowsiness, and potential abuse. Is it worth to take a trip to the dark side for a chance to feel better? And how do you convince your doctor to give you some?
Absolutely, it's worth a chance. I think it's easier to think of it as taking a trip to the light side, especially if you've had depression in the past. You're used to being mired in darkness and all your thoughts being dark. And so something like ketamine, just like cannabis, that can release a person from those relentless dark thoughts can be very pleasant. I think as far as convincing a doctor is concerned, the tricky thing that we have in New Zealand is that doctors seem to have an extremely high level of demand for research quality. They don't seem to have the same attitude as in America, which says that cannabis seems to be, for example, healthy enough to prescribe to people. New Zealand doctors appear to be wanting to see double-blinded research and with the United Nations stamp of approval and so on. So I think they're going to be really hard to convince. They're going to remain hard to convince, but what you can see is that other places overseas are all taking this new evidence into account, and they're all changing their laws, and they're all changing their best practices. So as all the other countries overseas start to change, pressure is going to increase on New Zealand to change, and hopefully we see this either this ketamine or the MDMA or psilocybin therapies that have been researched and are being researched at the moment in Australia. All three have shown a lot of promise. And I think that anybody who's taken an antidepressant or an antipsychotic can tell you the side effects are very unpleasant, they're very strong, and they can be very depressing. The sedation can be very depressing, and it would be very nice to have an alternative that had less side effects. And if ketamine can be it, then I think a lot of people would like to try it, me included.
Well, both ketamine and hydroxychloroquine are veterinary medicines that have been repurposed for human use. However, while ketamine is being explored as a potential treatment for depression, hydroxychloroquine has been widely rejected as a treatment for COVID-19. Why are scientists and regulators so picky about which animal drugs we can use? Or are they just jealous of our furry friends?
I think, unfortunately, what it comes down to is who makes the profit. It really doesn't make sense, for example, that regulators and administrators would be so relaxed when it comes to the potential side effects of things like zopiclone and olanzapine and amisulpride and other antipsychotics that have severe side effects, but on the other hand, be so stringent when it comes to the potential side effects of things like cannabis, which anybody who's taken an antipsychotic and used cannabis can tell you side effects of cannabis are about 1,000 times less. So it would be really nice for them basically to just get out of the way and let people have greater access to substances that could benefit them. My doctor said to me that it might be possible at some point in the years to come for me to get some kind of MDMA or psilocybin medicine. And I said, unfortunately, it's about 15 or 20 years too late. I needed it a long time ago. And really, a lot of people are suffering from a lack of access to these substances. So I think emphasis needs to go on opening up access rather than worrying about more potential restrictions.
Well, Vince, the All Blacks managed a resounding victory against the Springboks at Auckland's Mount Smart Stadium yesterday. The South Africans were on the back foot all night, and the Kiwis are now a whisper away from winning the championship trophy. What did you think of the game?
It was a great game. The All Blacks were definitely the strongest over the first 15 minutes. But what's interesting to note is that over the last 65 minutes of the match, the Springboks actually outscored the All Blacks 15-13. So as far as the World Cup is concerned, it's just early days yet, but it was a great game, another classic battle between the All Blacks and Springboks. I think it's just a shame that the final 15 minutes weren't the last 15 minutes, and it would have made the overall game much more close and much more exciting. But still, these matches are just warm-ups for the World Cup.
So what's the implications of this victory heading into the Rugby World Cup in September?
The All Blacks will be glad that they can still mix it with the top teams. The Springboks are, of course, the world champions. So the All Blacks will be thinking, if we can put 15 points on the world champions, then we're looking good for the World Cup. At the moment, I'd say that the World Cup looks like being a four-way race between France, Ireland, South Africa and New Zealand. And as we get closer to the time, I think we'll get a better idea of if any of those four teams really stand out from the others. But I think it's going to be the closest World Cup we've had in memory.
Oh, it's going to be exciting. Well, once again, we've come to the end of the show. Please remember to like and subscribe to the channel before you go. All the links to today's articles will be in the description. And Vince, what a week that was.
Cheers, Bob. Another extremely interesting week, and I'll see you all next week.
The Alt Centre are clown world's good guys. They don't fit into boxes neatly enough to be someone else's tools.